Hi, I'm Tiffany. Welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about something a little different but still relating to books. My child is a voracious reader and reads so much, and that is like about probably 70% of what she does with her day, intermixed with, play and going outside and eating and sleeping. Seriously, she reads all the time. And I have had a lot of parents ask me what I did to make her love reading so much. I am not even a little bit of an expert. I have one child and she's only 8. So I don't know, I can't necessarily speak to challenges for every parent in helping their child love reading, but these are some things that I found were really helpful for us. So the first thing maybe sounds a little obvious, but this is to model what you want to see. So if you want your child to try reading more, like reading more, let them see you reading. If you're attached to a screen all the time or you never take any time to read, then they're not seeing that modeled for them. Obviously, as a parent, you have lots of other things that you do, so this does not mean that you sit there and read a book and ignore your children. But if your child never sees you read anything at all, then why would they be interested in reading? The next tip is not to push your child. Now, when I initially made this tip, it was actually based off of our homeschooling experience. So if you're a homeschooler, this will be relevant to you. If you're not, then not so much. But when I was trying to teach Claire how to read, I had a lot of friends who had children who were reading at 3 and 4. And we started a formal curriculum to teach her how to read in kindergarten. And she was struggling. And it was really hard for her. And it got to the point where every time I would take out the book to work on a reading lesson, she would cry. And she would be so upset. And finally, I just decided this is not worth her hating reading and leaving this bitter taste in her mouth of this. So we took a break for a while. And for a while, my child was not even working on reading lessons at all. After a time, we came back to it and tried a different book. If you want a recommendation for that, you could just comment down below and I'll tell you what we used. But we waited until she was ready, and then it clicked and she took off. And by the time she was halfway through 1st grade, she was reading chapter books. So it took her longer to get there than some of her peers, but once she was there, she was really there. I will say that 1st grade is not that late to learn to read. There are some kids where they're 8 or 9 before it really fully clicks. And that is one disadvantage of public schooling, is that teachers don't have a choice. They have to teach that curriculum to the whole class, and some of the kids are already way past that, and some of those kids are not ready for it yet. So it's really just going to depend on the child, and that is a huge advantage to homeschooling, is that you can take things at your kid's pace. But apart from that not pushing in terms of curriculum, I would say that that's also true if you're just trying to get your child to read more. Don't try to force them to read, because then that makes reading a chore and it makes it something that they're being made to do and something that they hate. The next tip is something that maybe you are already doing, and that is read aloud to your kids. This is something that I think we automatically do with very, very young children, but even as your child gets older, you can still read aloud to them. I read aloud to my 8-year-old all the time, and not just school-related things, but things for fun. We have family read-alouds that we do together, and we have inside jokes surrounding books that we have read, and it is such a special connection. I will say that if your child is moving around and doing things while you're reading, don't assume that that means that they're not listening. I mean, if they're yelling over you and they're talking the whole time, they're probably not listening. But if they're just moving around, sometimes Claire literally like runs back and forth and jumps up and down because she's got like this scenario going on in her head while I'm reading to her. So if your child is moving around a lot, don't assume that that means that they are not listening to you. if you would like them to sit a little more still or have something to occupy them so that way they're not talking during it, you could have special toys or even crafts or different things that you bring out just during read aloud time, which makes it a little more special. This next tip works in terms of reading aloud, but also if your child is just reading to themselves, and that is let them pick what they're interested in. Sometimes we select books for our kids because we're like, oh, we loved this book, this is a great book, you're going to love this book, or we're like, this book has educational merit, or this book is a classic, so you should read this book. And then the child is like, but I don't want to read that book, that cover looks boring, that doesn't sound interesting, you know, things like that. So if your child wants to read about Legos or about Paw Patrol or about whatever. I don't know why those were the two random things that popped into my head, but if that's what they want to read about, let them read about that. That will help them to enjoy reading, and then they will move on to other things. They will not just read about Paw Patrol for the rest of their life. In terms of reading aloud, you can always have them say, okay, well, you pick a book and I'll pick a book, and you can read aloud 2 books to them. So that could be something that could really help to kind of broaden their horizons if that is something that you are wanting to do. The next tip is something that maybe sounds a little bit counterintuitive, and that is let your child read below their reading level. Like maybe way below their reading level. I think we have this ingrained in us that we want our kids to be smart and we want our kids to be well read, so we want them to be reading these challenging books so we can brag on them, or so they can be more cultured, or you know, whatever. I will say that my child has very advanced reading capabilities, so she can read Alice in Wonderland and she can read The Hobbit and comprehend them and really enjoy them. But there are times when she wants to read Magic Treehouse, and that is a very simplified book, or she wants to read a picture book that is for a beginner reader, so it's got like a sentence or less on every page. And you know what? That's okay. If you let your child read things that they enjoy or things that are easy for them to read, that doesn't mean that it doesn't count. The more your child reads and enjoys reading, the more they are going to want to read. So if you let them read things that are easy for them to read, then they're going to want to read more and more, and as they get used to more easy books, they'll want to read some harder books. Maybe they'll keep reading easier books, and that's okay too. For example, I'm sure every one of us adults who is watching this video, you're probably fully capable of reading Shakespeare, right? But are there times that you want to read something that is a little more mindless and doesn't require as much of your focus? Or maybe you don't like Shakespeare at all because it's so challenging and the language is so different. The same is true for kids, and that's okay. They should be allowed to read things that are easy, just like we should. The next is helpful for children who are trying to read independently, and that is to help them with big words. I actually got this tip from Sarah Mackenzie from Read Aloud Revival. Basically, you hand your child a book or a chapter book, and this is how it was with the very first chapter book that Claire read independently. I gave her the book knowing that she could read quite a few of the words. And I said, if there are any words in here that you don't recognize, you don't know what they are, just call me and I will come to you and tell you what that word is. So I was folding laundry and she'd call to me and point out a word and be like, what's that word? And I would tell her. And then if she didn't know what it meant, then I would tell her that. But most of the time she did know what it meant. She had just never learned to read that word because it was a slightly bigger word. So this gives your child more independence in reading without them feeling like they have to know every word, and you're still right there to help them. I will link below in the description the article from Sarah Mackenzie that had this tip in it, because it also has a really big list of series to read for struggling readers. So for readers who are struggling, it is so helpful for them not only to have these easier books to read, but then in addition they're part of a series. So they get attached to the characters and they finish that book and they want to read another one because they want to find out what happens next to those characters. The last tip on this list is to create incentives. This is going to look different for different families. So it could look like When you have read a book, you can check this off on this chart. When the chart is full, you get fill in the blank, something the child really wants, whether it's a new toy or actually better yet, they get to go to a bookstore and pick out a book that they want. That would be cool. But if your child doesn't love reading, then maybe that wouldn't be that good of an incentive. Another cool incentive could be that when your child finishes a book, or specifically a chapter book, that maybe you and the child go out for ice cream or something, and then you discuss the book and talk about it. Another fun way to encourage extra reading is when your child goes to bed at night, allow them extra reading time. And this is something that we do. So our daughter, her bedtime is 8 o'clock, but she's allowed to stay up as late as she wants if she's reading. Now, you may not want it to be as late as they want. We homeschool, so she can sleep in if she stays up super late. There are times when she's stayed up till 11 or even midnight reading, and then she gets to sleep till like 9 or whatever the next morning. And that's not going to be a possibility if your child goes to public school or has to get up earlier at a certain time or whatever. Then that's not as feasible. But you could say to your children, you have to go to bed at such and such time, but if you want to stay up reading, you can stay up for an extra 30 minutes, an hour, whatever. And you would be surprised how many children will take you up on that, especially because all parents know that bedtime is like this battle where children don't want to go to bed. So if they can find a way to delay going to bed, that's a way to get them to read more. So those are my tips if you have a child who absolutely does not like reading at all or is not interested in it at all. If you have any further tips or things that have worked for your child, please leave those in the comments below, so that way we can continue this conversation and have more tips for other people who may come looking for them. If you liked this video, please hit like and also subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.